What if everything you'd ever heard about your favorite storybook romance was actually true? What if your happily ever after was just around the corner? But when you get there, it's not quite what you expected. A case of mistaken identity, a whole lot of murder, a stolen inheritance, and a mysterious death. This is the Great Gatsby, but not as you know it. Jim, it was the summer of 1922 in Long Island, New York. Millionaire Jay Gatsby throws a huge party. People are dancing cheek to cheek with reckless abandon, and everyone is having the time of their lives. Then out of nowhere, a gunshot interrupts the festivity. Partygoers turn to see James Gats, or Jay Gatsby, lying dead on the patio with a bullet hole in his chest. He'd been shot by a man named George Wilson. But why? Well, that depends on how far back you want to go. Our story begins 5 years earlier with James Gats meeting the love of his life, a girl named Daisy Faye. Daisy came from money, while James did not, and her family wasn't exactly thrilled about the two of them being together. So James set out to win them over with a fancy party, complete with rented tuxedos, fake orchids, and a grand entrance. He even changed his name to Jay Gatsby. His plan worked and he became part of the upper class, all for the chance to be with Daisy. They fell deeply in love and married in secret before James went off to war, but it didn't take long for James to come back to reality. He got demoted for falling asleep on the job and was dishonorably discharged for trying to desert. With that, James decided to start fresh and make enough money so he could marry Daisy again and live the life he always dreamed of. He turned to bootlegging alcohol during the Prohibition era and soon became one of the biggest mob bosses on the East Coast. Under his new alias, Jay Gatsby, he made a fortune, built himself a mansion, and threw parties every weekend in hopes that Daisy would meet him there. And she did, reuniting with her old flame and leaving her husband Tom for Jay. They were finally able to be together, except that last part wasn't quite true either. See, Tom was cheating on Daisy with a woman named Myrtle, and had no intention of leaving her anytime soon. Even so, Daisy left Tom for Jay, even though it meant leaving her daughter behind. But that wasn't too much of an issue since the little girl wasn't really hers. Anyway, you see, Daisy's pregnancy wasn't exactly a product of true love. She slept with Jay because she wanted to get pregnant, but blamed Tom for the baby. Tom, on the other hand, knew full well that the child wasn't his. In fact, he was the one who suggested Daisy have an affair so they could have a baby. To put it bluntly, neither parent was interested in raising their own child. Tom and Daisy showed their true colors when they learned that Myrtle was pregnant with Tom's baby. They took her to a doctor and secretly had her secretly lobotomized without telling anyone. So when Myrtle went into labor and gave birth to a baby boy, she had no idea she was a mother. This, of course, caused some complications. When Myrtle tried to leave the hospital without paying her bill and was denied since the paperwork listed Tom as the father. Once Tom found out, he let his anger get the best of him and beat Myrtle to death with the heel of his hand. Luckily, Jay Gatsby was there to save the day, or at least stop Tom from getting arrested. He chased Tom down on the road and hit him with his car, sending both men to the hospital. After this incident, Myrtle never regained consciousness and died from her injuries, while Tom and Jay each recovered in their own homes. But it was only a matter of time until their paths crossed again. See, George Wilson, owner of the garage where Jay kept his car, had witnessed the hit and run and was determined to bring Tom down. However, he had no idea who the culprit was, thinking it was Jay Gatsby instead of Tom. So when Jay was found shot to death in his backyard, George assumed he'd gotten his man. But that wasn't the whole story. You see, George wasn't the only one who wanted Jay dead. That's because Jay had stolen George's wife, Myrtle, shortly after her lobotomy and had no intention of giving her back. In fact, Jay's mistress, a woman named Madeline, had fallen in love with George and told him the truth about Myrtle. George was furious and confronted Jay in his home, demanding he return his wife. But Jay refused, causing George to draw his gun and shoot him right in front of Madeline and Jay's servant, a man named Lefty. With Jay lying on the floor, bleeding out, George ran away, assuming he'd be arrested for murder. But when police arrived at the scene, they found something that changed everything. CJ hadn't just been shot once, but twice, meaning someone had snuck up behind him and shot him in the back of the head. Now, the police were convinced it was George, but Madeline knew better. She remembered seeing George shoot Jay in the chest, but not in the head. So there had to be another killer out there. As the police searched for clues, Madeline went to see Tom. She needed his help to clear George's name, but also had another motive for visiting him. She hoped he'd help her collect on Jay's life insurance. which would make them both very rich. It was a good plan, except she might have picked the wrong person to team up with. You see, Tom wasn't the honest, trustworthy man Madeline thought he was. In fact, he'd killed Jay to protect his own reputation. The thing was, Tom hadn't wanted to hurt Jay. He'd only intended to scare him off so Daisy could come back to him. But when Jay didn't leave town, Tom figured he'd be forced to tell the police. He'd been driving the car that hit Myrtle. So he paid a visit to Jay's house and shot him in the head to ensure that his friend, Maya Wolfsham, would take the fall for him. Of course, that meant Tom would inherit Jay's estate and become even wealthier than he already was. Madeline was understandably upset when she found out about Tom's betrayal, but knew that confessing would only land her in prison. She agreed to marry Tom and keep quiet, even though she had no idea what she'd gotten herself into. Meanwhile, the police were getting closer to the truth. After interviewing everyone at the party, they learned that Lefty had seen a man matching Tom's description arguing with Jay shortly before the shooting. And when police searched Tom's house, they found a pair of cufflinks that matched the ones Jay was wearing at the time of his death. At first, Tom tried to pin the crime on Maya, but quickly changed his tune when police found the real culprit, George, hiding in his garage. Tom confessed to shooting Jay in the chest and told the police where to find Madeline. She confessed to everything she'd done, including shooting Jay in the head to collect on his life insurance. As for George, he was set free when the truth about Myrtle came out. The poor guy had spent 4 years in prison for manslaughter, and had no idea it was all a big mistake. In the end, there were no happy endings. Myrtle never woke up from her lobotomy. Daisy continued to live her life, unbothered by the tragedy, and Tom and Madeline were sentenced to 20 years in prison. Maybe that's why the author of The Great Gatsby said it was the saddest story he'd ever written. So, do you think you would have been able to escape the tragic fate of Jay Gatsby? Or were you doomed to fall in love with the wrong person, just like Daisy? Either way, this is your host. Thanks for watching till the end and see you in the next video.